it's took every ounce of my fiber to not just detour home and enjoy this last beautiful summer night in Chicago. What I hope we can do today is really just have a good conversation on problems and spending time understanding the problem. I want to jump right in, and then we'll cover some housekeeping context in a bit. But this is not Abraham Wald. I'm talking about Abraham Wald in a second. I don't know if that name rings a bell for anyone in here, but hopefully his face is somewhat familiar. If you have any fans of Show the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you recognize this as Tony Shalhoub playing Abe Weissman. And the only point of him being up here is you'll probably never remember Abraham Wald a lot more clearly, tonight or tomorrow. Abraham Wald and Abe Weissman actually share a lot in common, so this is the real Abraham Wald. I'm going to tell you a little about sort of his life, his story, what he lent to the field of analytics, he, like Abe Weissman, was a professor at Columbia. He taught mathematics. He lived in New York City in the 1940s. And one of his most important roles was his role on the Statistical Research Group, which in the 1940s was using math and statistics to solve wartime problems, whatever he was doing in the 1940s, solving wartime problems. And one of the interesting problems he was tasked with understanding and solving was around sort of aircraft survival. And he spent a lot of time issuing many statistical papers and research into how to predict aircraft survival. And one of the things he came up with was this method of sort of data collection. So he asked pilots that were returning from missions when they landed to fill out a small card indicating where on the aircraft their plane had sustained some damage. Over time, he built a little bit of a model, assuming it looks something like this. I don't have any access to the actual renderings and sketches, but as the story goes, his research sort of produced this model of over time where most aircrafts were sustaining a lot of damage. The commanders in the field at that time got hold of this research and were just, like most people, sort of eager to get started on a solution and fixing the problem. And they were ready to sort of arm the aircraft in the locations where the plane had sustained the most damage. Assuming that all these aircraft are landing, this is where they're getting shot. We'll put extra armor over the wings and over the fuselage here. We'll protect the plane's higher survival. Wald and his team had to unfortunately pump the brakes on everyone sort of taking this research and running because his analysis had actually shown that it was just the opposite. That parts of the plane that you want to armor were the parts of the aircraft that showed no record of the plane sustaining any damage. And the reason is that Wald knew the research he was collecting. He understood sort of the bias that was implicit in collecting data from aircraft that were surviving. Right? He had asked the pilots when they were landing to fill out the form, indicate where in the plane their plane had been hit. And by definition, he was only collecting data from the sample of planes that made it back to base, that survived. And so he knew that these were the parts of the plane that you could sustain damage. The aircraft could still return to base. It wasn't fatal. Whereas all of the other locations in the plane could be, assumed to have sustained damage. He performed a statistical analysis to prove that. I'm just telling you today that he did that. And the end result, his end analysis and finding and recommendation was just the opposite of what the commanders had sort of assumed and sort of began to run away with. So the point in me telling you this little story is really that our conversation today will really just be about understanding problems. And I think it's one of the most overlooked portions of any analytics team, data science team, any business question. we ultimately like to just jump to solutions. So we'll talk a little bit about why we like to do that, but mostly spend the time walking through some examples, one in particular, from my experience, where I found digging and just seeking a greater understanding of the problem leads to a much more obvious solution than otherwise. So some of the housekeeping I mentioned at the beginning about me. I think Aaron probably had some link or information to my bio, but in case you're curious, I'm not a statistical researcher. I'm not an Abe Weissman or an Abe Wall, but I'm a data analytics manager at Grubhub. You've probably heard of Grubhub. Hopefully you've used it. If you haven't, you can download the app and start ordering some food tonight. I'm just one of the many people at Grubhub that works in data, as you can imagine. I'm sure the same is true for everywhere where you work. Data today is not a one-person, one-team job. The team I manage, we specifically manage the design and development of our in-house analytics service at Grubhub. And what that really means, practically speaking, is when you fire up that app, all that you're doing is basically kicking off a number of network calls to various services to actually provide the content back to the application to serve to you. Some of those network calls are specifically for analytics tracking. So we're really collecting data to recreate the experience so we can have a good insight in terms of what you saw, what you engaged with, what you ignored, and ultimately how your experience went. As you can imagine, with a company like Grubhub or any company, any product you use today, that's happening on an order of magnitude that's much more significant. We can't simply just sort of lean over your shoulder and watch what you're doing. We need to sort of design a system to collect that data, organize that data really methodically and systematically so they can derive some insights with that quantitative data. In my past, before Grubhub, I've worked at basically a bunch of marketplaces. I think that was kind of coincidence. They just kind of kept being the most interesting companies that I was talking to. Before Grubhub, I've worked in fashion marketplaces. Shopkeep's is one, and Etsy is the other. I started my career in tech at the handcrafted marketplace, vintage marketplace. Before tech, I worked at a bank, so I'm happy to chat about if you're interested in moving from bank to tech. Some nice ways to sort of pitch yourself as well. Cool. So yeah, I hope this is a conversation. As I mentioned, the goal and the sort of topic, the theme, is really just around seeking understanding and digging into a problem, and just trying to peel it back layer after layer after layer, and hopefully, that'll be interesting to you. If it's not, there's probably still some sunlight out there. You can go enjoy a little sunshine. I'll talk like one slide, five minutes about I think why I think this is so hard. This is not like a subject I've studied. It's just a subject I've kind of observed being in this space. And there's at least three minds myself. I have three minds that kind of give me, I guess, some indication of why I think it's so hard to start with a problem, why it's so hard to stay focused on a problem, and keep understanding the problem, and why we're so inclined to sort of jump to providing some solutions and some answers. The optimist in me says this is purely because we want to help. Right? We want to be useful to everyone around us, people we work with. If someone comes to us with a question, right, we want to have an answer. It feels like I'm here, I should be able to give you an answer. I'm doing, I'm proving my worth. I think that's the optimistic view. Right? The pessimist in me says this is simply like by design. It's how we're trained, right? From a young age. I have two little kids myself, and we don't teach them, I don't coach them on how to question everything I tell them. I tell them information, and I say, don't question it. Just like, this is fact, right? And all of our education, our schooling is really designed around repeating answers. We learn arithmetic and spelling, and we get questions from professors and teachers, and we just spit back an answer. No professor likes to have the question posed back to them, why that's even an important question. And so the realist in me just says that whether either of those first two scenarios are true, doesn't really matter. It's just difficult. It's just hard. Sometimes awkward to be in an environment where you go to a data analyst, data scientist, ask them a question, and they say, why do you need to know that, right? That's like an awkward sort of response, and it's like very aggressive, and it feels kind of confrontational, and you might not get promoted if you're someone just walking around being like, why do you need to know that? Like, you don't need to know that. So the realistic view is it's just a difficult thing to approach, and you have to be sort of tactful in how you unpack problems. Otherwise, you won't be invited to unpack them very often. So this particular sort of scenario case study we'll walk through is from my own experience. It's from my time at Etsy. I'll preface it like little legalese. That it's from many years ago, so it in no way speaks to like the stats, problems, issues that the marketplace is experiencing now. It's from my time there, which was about 5 years ago. So like more than enough time for things to have changed significantly, and this is just sort of an example of what I walked through there. If anyone doesn't know what Etsy is, it's a marketplace where individual buyers and sellers meet and exchange goods. Those goods historically have been items that sellers have made, or at least been involved in the making process. That definition grows, right, as marketplaces expand and get bigger. But that's really what the marketplace is all about. It's individuals, buyers, and sellers. That's important context to sort of have the back of your mind to walk through this scenario. So here's our happy buyer and seller. I don't exactly know which one's supposed to be which, but in this scenario, I guess I'm assuming this is the buyer and seller. In my time there, one of the questions that I was posed was, what are the biggest pain points that our buyers and sellers are experiencing, and what should we do about it? And it's like that nice, gigantic, sort of ambiguous, needy question that I love, and I was like, this is awesome, perfect, like super open-ended, dig into this a lot. But after a little while, it becomes a little scary because you're just like, there's, boil the ocean. There's so much that you can do with that question. So I first started to sort of like get some framework for evaluating and then sharing sort of this ambiguous like pain point metric and sort of how we define pain. And ultimately chose sort of like this severity and like the prevalence. So how serious is this pain and how widespread is it across our marketplace? In terms of severity, in this little ecosystem, I was only thinking about in the context of like, what's the most serious pain that a buyer or a seller would experience? And, I would think about that maximum pain as being what would prohibit a buyer from being a buyer or a seller from being a seller? Like, what would prohibit you from sort of fulfilling your role in this marketplace? And prevalence, obviously, is just how many buyers and sellers across our marketplace had this issue, experienced this issue. And so, naturally, when faced with like a really big, ambiguous question, took like the slowest method of data collection, which is really that rich qualitative data. And I think this is something that I felt comfortable doing because I wanted to sort of remain open to sort of where this research could go. But I think it's something that for many of you who are working in this space already, or working with colleagues who are working in this space, definitely would encourage more sort of like cross data collaboration. I think it's very easy in the field, right, to sort of stay siloed. If you're a data science, data analyst, you just approach every problem with one of a few models, one of a few toolkits. If you're more of a researcher, sort of go to your customer focus groups, go to your surveys. We all sort of stay pretty siloed in terms of where we look for insights, because it's what we're comfortable with. But there's a ton of value in sort of spanning the spectrum of research and looking in places that you might not expect to start to sort of find sort of that rich contextual data and surveys, customer reviews, customer support emails, forums. This is where we started for this research, really digging into that sort of like non-scalable sort of data analysis, to just gain some understanding of how people were describing the problems, what kind of issues they were having, in their own words. And then secondly, sort of followed up with some sort of qualitative and both quantitative grounding. So once we had some context in terms of what issues we were sort of reading and learning about, then going back to some quantitative data to figure out, okay, how prevalent is this issue in the marketplace? What metrics, what analytics would we have to tease out how big of an issue it is? And at least for this particular marketplace at this time, what we're seeing was, this is just an illustration, but what we're seeing was the list of seller pain points was very fragmented. There really wasn't a concentration on a particular issue. Many sellers experienced different things, and they were all pretty weak on the severity scale. None of them seemed to prohibit sellers from continuing to sell on the platform. But they had lots of different complaints and beefs, as any marketplace would once you start really digging into what people are having issues with. On the buyer side, it was a much cleaner, simpler picture. There were really just a few pain points for buyers, and it was much easier to sort of get our arms around all the different issues and then how prevalent they were. I'll describe. So, basically, for the buyer side within the marketplace at this time, you can imagine, the number one complaint and the number one issue that buyers were experiencing was, I don't know if anyone's ever bought anything on any marketplace, Craigslist, eBay, Etsy, but not getting your items is probably something you're kind of annoyed about. You spend the time, put some money out, didn't get your item, or it wasn't what you expected when it showed up. What we were seeing, at least this time, was really weren't that many issues for buyers that were apart from sort of that transactional dispute. So there's a little bit of like variety within that category, but they also were lumped into this transactional dispute, so we'll call them issues or disputes. And there was one question in particular that we found in using some customer research that was done at that time, run by our research team, a survey that asked a number of questions, both buyers and sellers, just gauging their experience, brand recognition, lots of questions. But one of the questions in particular that was asked to these both buyers and sellers is the net promoter score, net promoter question. You've probably seen this if you work in any like e-commerce context, but it's a very common question, right? How likely are you to recommend this product to a friend, colleague, never word it a little differently. Buyers and sellers were asked this question. This isn't really about NPS, but in case you just need some context for how it works, if you haven't answered it, you probably have answered it, you didn't even know you're answering it. When somebody asks, we'll typically give you a little scale, 0 to 10, not likely at all to recommend this product, or I'm very extremely likely. And calculate your net promoter score. You just take all of your promoters and subtract your detractors. So the percentage of promoters that you have minus the percentage of detractors you have. That's your net promoter score, if that makes sense. So basically just ignore anybody who answered 7 or 8. Those are your passives. And figure out how many customers do you have, buyers or sellers or whatever customer you're working with, are going to go out there and recommend your product to their family, friend, colleague. It's really the best recommendation that a customer can have. It speaks to their satisfaction. I'm so satisfied, I want to tell everybody they should use this product. And what we were seeing in this particular research was, if you look at Net Promoter Score overall, for all of your customers, or all of your buyers, all of your sellers, wasn't that interesting. Didn't provide much insight. Even among first-time buyers. didn't really provide much more insight. But when looking at first-time buyers who had an issue on their first order, we had seen some pretty alarming stats. And I don't know if I have it. But for first-time buyers, at that time, again, this was 5 years ago, we're seeing that first-time buyers who experienced a order issue, so they didn't get their item or it arrived that wasn't what they expected, had a deeply negative net promoter score. So way more detractors than we had promoters. Makes sense, right? Like who's going to promote the product if they just burn them time and money? The issue is compounded, if you can imagine. It depends on the site, depends on your product. But we're using a product for a gift, time-sensitive date, birthday, anniversary, wedding. These are all like major life events. You do not want to not get the item you expected, or at all, or not get what you expected. So you're going to be very annoyed. In terms of that little severity prevalence scale, although it wasn't catastrophic on the prevalence in terms of how widespread the issue was, severity-wise, at least the way we were thinking about it, couldn't really think of anything that would be more serious. Not only, obviously, this is post-transaction, so you've been able to convert that individual buyer, but your likelihood of losing customers, right, from that individual kind of going out in the world and telling everybody like, don't buy on this platform. Like, I'm going to tell you a story. People love to tell, I don't know. Maybe it's like kind of a perverse thing. People love telling horrible stories about their experiences on airlines or on websites. And so, there was just kind of like an N factor here. Like, whoever, that one individual wasn't just a single buyer loss that they could spread depending on how big their family or friend was. So we started digging into these buyers. So in this little graphic, I'm assuming just buyer, but in this scenario, we started digging into some of the data we had on buyers. And pretty quickly, it became apparent that this just wasn't enough information that we could really learn a lot about first-time buyers who had this issue. We dug into their purchase category, price points, locations. Nothing really stood out as a unique signal that separated this group from other first-time buyers who had great experiences. So pretty quickly we had to sort of change direction, and luckily in the marketplace, you have both sides of the transaction to be able to analyze. With every buyer, there's a seller. So we started analyzing a lot more about the sellers that were causing this issue for first-time buyers, digging into all the information we had on those sellers. Luckily, they're not always first-time sellers. So you had a lot more history, a lot more data to work with to understand those sellers. And most of this project really became about unpacking that seller side of the equation. Similar to buyers, we had seen that within categories and price points and locations, there was nothing super apparent or obvious, and it became very hard to sort of compare experiences across this whole category. And we needed like a more uniform rubric metric to start looking at them, and ultimately landed on volume and time. This is sort of time since that shop began selling, and the number of orders, number of issues that they had accumulated. So this is just a representation, but you can see the green was the volume of orders that a shop had accumulated. In the little red dots are representations of the volume of issues or disputes, so orders with an issue that the shop had accumulated. And that full time axis is the time since the shop started selling. So then we were able to compare sort of all shops that had caused an issue for a first-time buyer to one another. And let's start to look at what patterns we could observe in how they were accumulating orders, how they were sort of racking up issues. Interestingly enough, this is just sample, but this is really like the four sort of most common patterns that emerged among all of the sellers that we looked at who had caused this issue for first-time buyers. And when you start digging into what's happening with each of these shops, it became pretty apparent that this group in like the top left was really the pattern that most resembled our like true bad apples, bad actors. They were typically, very quick to accumulate orders, seemingly overnight, which was sort of atypical for most shops. So they onboard and they sort of slowly get some orders. These shops were just, turning it on, getting a lot of orders very quickly, and just as quickly getting a lot of disputes and issues. And typically the two didn't overlap. So you could quickly see that as soon as an order was sort of eligible to be disputed, or have the buyer raise their hand and say, I didn't get my item, that there was a flood of issues. So it wasn't the case that really any of the orders were good. It's like you get a lot of orders and then they all just turn into issues. I'll talk a little more about that group in a second, but luckily for this group, we had seen that they were pretty small, so it was only really around like 1% of those sellers that had an issue fit into this mold, sort of exhibited this pattern, but they ended up accounting for 20% of all of the disputes and issues that were out there. So they were certainly an important group, one that we had already spent a lot of time looking into, but looking at this dimension was an extra way of understanding sort of how earlier detect those types of shops. The top right, ultimately we kind of just came to term like the Shark Tank shop, which was a pattern of transactions and sales that was pretty steady, kind of humming along, and then sort of an overnight spike in orders, transactions, and pretty quickly I couldn't keep up with that volume, and those orders ended up becoming issues. I think at least one of those that I remember, one of those shops digging into them actually was featured on Shark Tank. And it's kind of like that, best case scenario, right? You become so wildly popular, you can't keep up with it, but there's always a side effect. There's always another side to that coin. And we had seen that group, pretty consistently exhibit that same behavior. This third pattern we had seen was, there were a number of shops that, had great consistent volume, were selling pretty regularly and without issue, and really no warning sign. All of a sudden, a bunch of disputes popped up sort of overnight. Digging into a lot of those scenarios, we had found that, unsurprisingly, if you sort of know the marketplace, it's a mixture of professionals and hobbyists. Sometimes it's a one-person shop, sometimes it's a little bit more, but life happens, and life events can derail a small business, in particular, one that rests on the shoulders of one person. And lastly, this category, kind of just thinking of and terming as the slow bleed, which was pretty consistent volume, nothing really out of the ordinary, and a few sort of cases, issues, sort of just creeping in over time, and slowly sort of starting to accumulate when you look at them in aggregate, even if like any given day nothing looked that serious. So all of this conversation is really just about unpacking problems, understanding problems. The ultimate output of this was sort of a mixture of some more advanced detection and analytics, some policy changes, some workflow changes. Ultimately, what kind of became bucketed under this like service level theme across the org. But it really became about detecting those patterns we started to see emerge, being more proactive with education and reaching out to these shops the earliest that we could detect that something wasn't right, within their shop, that they weren't exhibiting sort of the pattern that you expect them to exhibit. And then, you know, a team and workflow to help sort of remediate some of those shops that weren't in that bad actor category, but were just, you know, trying to execute a successful business and needed a little help sort of managing the flow of transactions. So that's it. Yeah, that's really what I wanted to cover. Just walk through a little scenario and case study in my time that I've seen. You know, be probably like the clearest example of just having an interest in seeking understanding and digging into the problem, putting off as long as possible the solution so that you can give yourself the space and freedom and time to sort of understand the root cause, understand what's happening underneath the surface, and hopefully not fall victim to that sort of walled-esque, flight scenario where you sort of jump to the solution. I'm happy to answer questions, talk about any of this or others. Let me know sort of where you want to take it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I might have missed the beginning, but were the only two measures that you took into account time and volume to kind of group these 4 buckets of consumers? Yeah.
So we had started digging into a lot more variables than that, and interestingly enough, couldn't find any like observable, connectors between these shops among like price point and their category and so their location, buyers' locations, shipping methods. Looking at just all the collection of data we had around their transactions, their shop, their history, and using time, using the volume became, I guess for us, just an easier way to apply like a consistent lens to all of these shops, rather than trying to like view them all in isolation and relative only to their, to their product category or their price point.
You had mentioned there were a lot of things about the first-time buyers that you genuinely just didn't know. So after this exercise, did you end up kind of like adding some things to the database or questions so that you could, in the long term, have a better profile of some of those consumers? Or
yeah, I think the first-time buyers, there weren't any like actionable data points that we wanted to capture that we didn't have. It was more a result of, you're new to the platform, you set up your shop, maybe you favorite a couple of items, make a purchase, maybe you don't have a profile, you don't have an avatar, you don't have any real data on you. But the question always becomes, what's your hypothesis? Like, what data would you expect would indicate that you, as a first-time buyer, are more likely to have an issue? And that's kind of where we found, okay, the data's thin on the first-time buyer side, but it's really out of your control as a first-time buyer, whether or not the seller doesn't ship you your item or they ship you something that wasn't what you expected. And so we did toy with adding, in terms of the workflow enhancements and sort of product enhancements, adding more fixed sort of required information into the transaction detail. So forcing buyer and seller to sort of agree on color and agree on size and agree on more specific details about a custom product. Let's say if you have you can order lots of stuff on Etsy. I think it's 40 million listings. But let's say you order a custom cutting board in the shape of your cat's face. It's agreeing on the type of wood and the size. So we toyed with sort of basically just lobbying for that product to provide a little extra nudge in a direction that we would expect they might have a conflict or an issue if the seller just goes off and produces a teak cat-based wood cutting board and the buyer's I wanted pine. This isn't what I expected. But the challenge, with an open marketplace is that there's not a lot that's really fixed and required for you as a
They're all
shop.
attributed the same, and you want the checkout to
Right,
be easy.
and so there is now options for you to add in notes and add in specifications for your custom made item, but there's still a lot of room there, and then the buyer can still forget if they have any specifications. Sometimes they don't think about it until it arrives. So that's where there's always more that you could urge and more that you could learn, but at least on the seller side, we were able to get a body of information about their behavior, whereas on the first-time buyer side, all we could do was sort of hope that we could improve the transaction next time around.
Yeah. And how about inventory visibility? Did you want, and I'm assuming a lot of the product is warehoused by the seller, correct? Or
Yeah.
did you guys want more inventory visibility to kind of have a red flag?
Yeah, so it's a huge challenge with any open marketplace, right? Etsy, there are no items held by Etsy. Everything's held by individuals around the world, and many of them are unique. And so, oftentimes there isn't any inventory. Someone's just kind of I found this item, I'm selling it, or made this particular thing, and I can make a couple, but not a lot, right? And so there are now more checks on on when an individual seller chooses to list their quantity that they have for a particular item, and a lot of times they think one, list one. There's checks on the numbers that they enter, and then sort of some automated workflow around checking in with that. Did they really mean one? Did they really mean 99? Really just kind of having them sort of confirm some of those choices, which have implications for all buyers as well as for everyone in the shop. But yeah, it's definitely a huge challenge to sort of manage an open marketplace through behavioral, sort of change, right? So it's you don't really have control over either party, and you're trying to ensure that they get to the table and find a mutual agreement over this item. And so, yeah, a lot of the effort with these standards and others was really around education and getting particularly shop owners to think about the impact of accepting orders. Right? Once you say you're open for business, better ready to be open for business, right? Otherwise, it could have some downstream. Sure.
I'm curious, your current experience with Grubhub. You mentioned that you're focused on internal metrics or internal analytics.
Yeah, so it's actually.
So if you could shed some light on that, that would be awesome. I was with Pep Boys for 6 years, and they did all kind of metrics internal, some of which, had who knows what the relevance was in terms of controllable store profit. So then at times we're measuring this, but why? And where's this going? So if you could kind of, in that context, how do you make sense of that? It's
actually an internal service. So one point of clarification. So if anyone's used Google Analytics, Google Analytics is a third-party service that a lot of companies will use to collect web data, collect web events. The service managed is actually an internal, homegrown application that does something very similar. So it's still, front-end web analytics, still collecting session-level data, and event-level data based on, all of the cheeseburgers and hot dogs that you're looking through. But it's homegrown, developed internally, which, a lot of companies that reach a certain size decide they need this data that they've typically been relying on Google Analytics for in-house. That's what I meant by internal. And the reason for that is, experimentation. You want to run your own A/B experiments, and you need that sort of richness that owning your own individual like, event and session level data brings. And the second is sort of deep user experience analysis. So if you rely on GA, typically looking at aggregate metrics, the total number of sessions we had, or total number of page views for this particular page, or in aggregate, what was the percentage of sessions that went from this page to this page? With a homegrown tool, you can look at each individual event that took place in a session. And a session is just a collection of user behavior within an app. But yeah, we're always, I think, still bringing a pretty critical eye to why we track something, who's using it. There's no point in tracking it if no one needs to use it. Otherwise, it's just wasting server space and mind share and everything else. So definitely bring a critical eye to making sure we're only tracking things that have some actionable insight, some hypothesis around that somebody wants to test and use and learn from.
Just to kind of circle back to what you started off with when you were talking about biases. Curious, in the data set you were working with at Etsy, were there any biases that you had kind of discovered that you maybe didn't expect or thought would be more impactful than others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's always a chance that you're taking a very narrow, like, tunnel vision approach to solving a problem. Our approach to try to mitigate that was really to look through the weeds, really to get into the weeds and look through the forums, to read what people were posting, to read customer support emails, to read through all of that data, not all of it, but read through enough of it that we could sort of get some grounding for then what to look for when running some analysis within the whole marketplace. And that was sort of was the best way we found to get comfortable with, are we not only just jumping down a path that we sort of know what we expect to find, but we're really casting a pretty wide net. And at least on the seller side, I think it was interesting to find that, the pain points, the complaints, the issues were, pretty fragmented. I didn't have an expectation one way or another, but it was interesting that at least on the seller side, there was no sort of uniform pain point. It just seemed like there were half a dozen things that were uncomfortable. But within a marketplace, you'll typically have like one side of that marketplace that's much more motivated to act than the other, and particularly within an e-commerce marketplace, sellers will get it done, right? If things are a little uncomfortable, or they prefer to have like a mass listing uploader and edit all their listings at once, like that's a common complaint you'll hear at an open marketplace. They'll still, make it happen to make a sale. But on the buyer side, like any little thing will just throw you off. You're like, it's kind of like a loose commitment to purchase, whereas a shop owner who's got a craft is like, I'm committed to making this work.
Just curious, that's a good follow-up to that. I don't know if there was a way to think that maybe Etsy was the bias of that. If you're looking at time to be the continuum, and
Yeah.
It was, I don't know if everyone would start at the same time to be the seller, or if they were staggered, but like, was it just that folks had started their businesses at the same time and got comfortable and maybe became sloppy or something like that?
Yeah, it could be. And in that case, like time was actually like relative to the shop. So it was like days since that shop started. So they were like hopefully relatively similar, but you can never control for like the the general ecosystem, right? It's like there were geographic events or postal delays. It could it could still impact different shops at their life cycle at their particular point in time worse than others. But in this case, we tried to look at like digging into those patterns that were more things that were not sort of like the force majeure clause, like not like forced upon them from some like catastrophic weather event, but something that happened in their shop.
Yeah, I guess I meant more that like, if you were trying to compare like other e-commerce companies, like, if they would have a similar problem because it was some other issue that like you're I guess trying to point that if you buy it's like your own ideas
Yeah, absolutely. It would be nice to know like,
right.
did they keep selling on whatever other platform like smoothly? Was it only like they figured like, I'll let these orders go? Like, are we only seeing sort of like one sliver of their overarching shop like behavior, shop history, which is likely the case. I think most typically like hobbyists will maybe dabble, but like a lot of professional sellers will sell on all platforms, so they have a product that fits across many marketplaces. So they kind of get that line. Yeah.
You said you came from a banking background.
Yeah.
Were you doing very similar things as you are now, analytics? And if you were, tell us a little bit more about that and
Yeah.
what data points really stood out in the banking world. I know it's ever changing, like everything is,
Yeah.
but banking models definitely changed a lot more.
It was. I guess it was kind of similar in the sense that like I was an analyst and associate within a technology and accounting like org, but it wasn't like this similar in the sense that I wasn't looking at like a lot of behavioral analytics. But when I made that commitment or decision that I wanted to move from finance, it was kind of a dark period in finance. So I jumped into first job was like September 15th, 2008, which is like literally like Monday after like Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and it was like just going into work and like in a suit, and you're like, all right, here I go. Nope, it's gonna be a bear. And luckily, at that time as an analyst, they have like the least incentive to let you go. You're just kind of like hanging around, like eager and happy to do anything. So I stuck it out for a few years, and then moved a couple of teams, but had a desire to get closer to something I could relate to. And I think for myself, I was working on an accounting project that was sort of digging into like the way the bank's general ledger was actually populated, and it was like just far from something I could do it like I could relate to on a daily basis. And I was like, I want to use a product that I can work on. I want to work on a product I use, and sort of made that change from Morgan Stanley to Etsy in like 2013.
Or on a similar note, what was I was curious to hear your thoughts on why pursue a law degree. Because then you were already kind of out of, that was 2011, 2015, so you were...
Yeah, I started in the evening, so I went to law school in the evening, 4 years. It's 4 years ago in the evening rather than 3, which seems kind of cruel. Like, I'll only get 1 more year, but I started in 2011, I think 2011, and I foresaw an interest in startups, an interest in tech, but long term, still this desire to use the experience I had in a different way. Thought it'd be a useful background, at least more useful than going back to like a business degree, given that like I studied business undergrad and wanted to learn something new. And by the time I finished, a lot had happened in tech, a lot had happened in data. I've been in data for at least 3 or 4 years at that point. And, the market honestly was much more interesting and favorable than on the legal side of things. And I was like, I'll use it maybe when I'm 50. But, it was a good experience, but definitely like a lot of time and energy and reading. I ate, I think, like 900 peanut butter jelly sandwiches over like a 4-year period. It was like it was a dark period of my eating history. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
How did you get I don't know how long this process took with this project with Etsy, but how did you get the buy-in from the owners to let you take the time to really dig down into the problem and not just fire off a solution in a week?
It took a while. I think I remember getting the question, like having the conversation with our senior leader in like our January, February timeframe, and delivering sort of like a final set of like recommendations and sort of analytics that were ready to be applied. Closer to like spring. So it took 4 or 5 months, I think, probably around that time frame. And I think that our approach for it at that time was, posting often. So, in those sort of regular conversations, sort of sharing updates about what we learned, where we're at, where we're going. And I think at each stage, there was always just a lot more interesting stuff to learn than there was stuff we found out, which is always kind of a good place to be. You want to have like enough information to share where you're like, all right, like, there's enough learnings already that we were kind of like proving this is worth digging into, and then there's like still this giant ocean of like opportunity that we could keep looking into, and I think that helped get the buy-in. Also helped to like, at that time the company, it was 5 years. The company was a lot younger, and I think at an earlier stage, people were, thinking a lot of stuff's going on, and they were certainly excited to see it continue to evolve. Sure.
Was it your job to actually then make a recommendation in terms of how to act on that data? And like, did you say, if we have these bad actors, we need to get them off the platform? And then how did the analytics improve over time as a result of your findings?
Yeah, it was luckily like a pretty open remit. So whether they wanted recommendations or not, we were like, all right, these are the recommendations. And the final product, I think it was, sort of, as I mentioned, kind of a collection of recommendations across different types. So saying, here are the product recommendations, product enhancements, workflow recommendations, and then on the analytics side, sort of coming to the table ready with, the model queries to sort of like detect and find some of these different scenarios. Luckily, at that time, there already was, some sort of like risk analytics in place, sort of detecting different issues, and it's still in place, but it was more about what can we add to those. Here's a model that already works well to find some issues. What have we learned that can just sort of like help supplement that? I think that was certainly like a helpful thing to have as part of a recommendation set, is like figuring out where you can plug in things that you've learned to like something that's already happening. To create like a whole new model, no reason to throw out the old one. It's just like some additional learnings that we could fit into some places. The only things that were created from scratch was there's a team. At that time, there was a team that was created to actually handle some of like the manual education and remediation that covered sort of that 99% that wasn't bad actors and bad apples, but people that were just trying to manage a shop, and sort of help that team surface those accounts really quickly, help them detect them, help them reach out to them, and sort of like help them even sort of like risk rank and like sort of push them out into different categories so different parts of that team could address them depending on how severe what we were seeing was. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
We're gonna do one more question and then hang out for individual stuff.
Cool.
What are some of the major tools and technologies you use to analyze that data at Etsy, and then how does that compare to what you and your team use at Grubhub?
Yeah, I'd say the field's really like continue to grow with time. I think at that time it was mostly started a lot with like qualitative data, digging into the weeds, reading a lot of surveys and emails, then moving to use R and use SQL to sort of munge larger data sets to figure out how prevalent some of those issues we were seeing were across the marketplace. Today, it's pretty open-ended. Most tech companies will let you use sort of whatever. So we have people using R and Python, and SQL's still, I think, the best tool set you can learn. I think I have a brother-in-law who's recently graduated. If you're interested in tech and you're sort of like just starting out, it's like just learn SQL. Like it's like still such a powerful, simple language that will enable you to dig into problems, dig into questions that still most of your company can't. And then in visualization, I mean, like today we use Tableau a lot at Grubhub. Back then, I think we used Etsy. At least at that time, was a very